shall fall to our night is a must. So Babylon set the liberty, every day another one bite the dust. My Lord, you don't have to say you're sorry for all the wrongs that you have done. I don't want a sad story, cause the damage already done. Oh, the damage already done. Broken bones and wounds need tender repair. Hang on, brother man, don't despair. Although we forgive 7 times 7, still the damage already done. So much damage already done. Stop and listen now, mind to meditation style, going straight to your mind, to your wicked and wild. Only where you can deal with these vibes is to free up your soul and mind. Yaga 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 yo. You don't have to say you're sorry for all the wrongs that you have done. I don't want a sad story, cause the damage already done. Oh, the damage already.
Good evening and thank you very much for joining me on Plain Talk this evening. My name is Christopher Ram. The topic tonight is a week in politics, and the guest tonight is Mr. Timothy Jonas, chairperson of ANAG and senior counsel, prominent commentator on television as well. Mr. Timothy Jonas, welcome to Plain Talk.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
The week in politics. You know, there's this saying that is, I think, wrongly attributed to Harold Wilson. A week in politics is a long time. And 3 weeks in politics is twice as long. Figure that one out. How has the past week been for politics in the country? And politics for you as one of the leaders?
There's so many things going on. It's hard to know where to start. Before the show started, for full disclosure, Chris and I had been discussing COVID and had almost decided we wouldn't raise it, but maybe that's the first thing to start with since it's omnipresent.
No pun intended.
The country has been hit hard by COVID. Not as hard as other countries. I think we may have been saved by our hot weather and the fact that we don't live in such crowded conditions as in other countries. We don't cram into subways and trains and that kind of thing to get infected by each other. But we have been hit hard. The government's campaign of vaccination has had its hiccups. They pushed it through. And I think a lot of the means they used, they probably could have used better means. The government met a lot of opposition. People were hesitant to get the vaccine. And again, that hesitancy seemed to be along political lines. But it seems as if people are finally understanding that the vaccination is absolutely crucial if you want to be safe and if you want your family to be safe. We've had some tragic losses of life, and as it comes closer and closer to home, and as we see the records daily in the newspapers and online published about the number of deaths, 4 deaths a day, 5 deaths a day, 8 deaths one day, and we see that of these deaths, 8 out of 10 and 9 out of 10 are unvaccinated people. There's only one conclusion to draw. So one good thing that the government has done is that program of education. Simply by showing the statistics of the 6 people who died, 5 are unvaccinated, 1 is partially vaccinated. All are unvaccinated, all are unvaccinated, all are unvaccinated. At some point, the penny has finally dropped, and I see that people on both sides of the divide are now going to take their vaccine. That's the only way that we can get over this. And although I disagree with a lot of the steps that the government took in terms of excluding unvaccinated folks from access to public facilities, access to the banks, to shops, to insurance companies, to the public ministries, that was heavy-handed, it was draconian, I'm not even sure it was lawful. But at long last the penny is dropping, and I think that I want to encourage everybody to be vaccinated. Get vaccinated if you have not been. That will get us over the bump, and we should see an improvement once that is done. So I think that was important to say and to keep saying. Get vaccinated.
Yeah, a question, and I think you reflect a lot of popular view that the government has done pretty well in terms of the vaccination and its availability of vaccine. Do you think it has been sufficiently vigorous in social distancing and mask wearing, and you walk around town, or even in observing the curfew?
That is where I have a serious problem with the steps that were taken. The one example that comes to mind, we're Guyanese, we're laid back, we tend to break the rules, we're accustomed to breaking the rules, so we have a drink late at night and we forget that there's a curfew and we pretend that we don't know about it and all of that. But that is something that we need to keep doing. We need to practice social distancing. You will notice that Chris is wearing a mask, I am not, and we're 6 feet apart. We are both vaccinated, so we took that decision before the show started that this is how we would do it. The problem I have is that I see a lopsided approach to this whole thing about social distancing and preventative measures. The regulations I saw exempt casinos. Exempt casinos.
Very specific.
So if you ask yourself, and any member of the public asks themselves, who is associated with casinos and how on earth do you justify exempting a casino from the rigors of the curfew and keeping shut and social distancing? That kind of thing I don't understand, and that shows such a lopsided approach that you have to step back and really ask yourself who's making these decisions and why it is that we just can't get these things right in such obvious ways. With that being said, there is a general tone that we are getting more lackadaisical in terms of the social distancing. But that goes to personal discipline and understanding personally you're not just responsible to yourself. Most of us go home and interact with our families, our children, our wives, our husbands. You're not just putting yourself at risk.
You raised a question about you talked about draconian, and you kind of skirted the question of the constitutionality of mandatory vaccination. What's your view of the legal position?
Well, the question of a mandatory vaccination has never arisen. I don't think at any point there was a threat that you would go in people's houses and forcefully vaccinate them. But if that were ever to be proposed, I am quite satisfied it would not be lawful. The choice has got to be with the individual what to do, but the balance has to be struck that the individual must not endanger the people around him. The thing is that we conflate those two issues, we confuse them. And I have yet to see, and I'm the first to say that because this is a new and evolving situation, the statistics aren't really out yet for a definitive conclusion to be reached. But if the vaccine protects you from serious symptoms, but does not protect you from being infected, then you are susceptible to infect others, and you are susceptible to be infected, whether you're vaccinated or not. The difference is that if you're not vaccinated, you're going to be on that list of deaths that appears every day. That's the difference.
So, the government hasn't directly said lay down mandatory vaccination, but to some extent, indirectly it has.
It has. And what you see and what I've observed in the States and in England, Boris Johnson in England gave a speech today to his Conservative Party, and everyone was sitting down there. Not everyone was wearing masks, and they were in a crowded room. When enough people are vaccinated, you have to understand that given that we will all sooner or later be exposed to the virus, if enough people are vaccinated, you need to understand that it's time to start depending on the vaccine and retreating from the rigors of the social distancing, of the curfews, and of that kind of thing. We have to get back into society once enough people have been inoculated. In the States, there's no longer a requirement that you wear masks because enough have been vaccinated.
Well, in some states.
In some states,
yes.
Agreed. So I think that instead of conflating the two, social distancing and vaccination, we should treat them separately. And there needs to be a target that we reach. That when this percentage of the population is fully vaccinated, we can then step back from the policies that we know hurt the economy, the curfews and the closures of the public spaces and restaurants and that kind of thing, so that the economy can get back on track. But there needs to be a definitive target, and no one knows what that target is, and maybe that's something that the government needs to decide on if they haven't decided, and share with us.
Your party is part of the group, the joiner. The MP who is serving in the National Assembly at this time called for a special allowance to MPs, and I think he justified it in relation to, say, serving constituency. Now, clearly not every MP serves a constituency. You have the 25 geographical and the rest part is the national top-up. Is that a position of the joiner, or is that an individual position?
No, Mr. Schuman hadn't consulted us before he threw that suggestion out. And I think the suggestion is a tall order. But I'm sure he has his reasons and he will defend his position. For me, I object to every preference that the parliamentarians seek to give themselves. If you are passing laws to bind me, you shouldn't be exempt from the laws. And we have parliamentarians who approve tax measures that make buying vehicles prohibitive for me, and then exempt themselves from those tax measures and give themselves duty-free concessions. That's disgraceful, and that's the kind of thing that leads to injustices in a society where the people who impose the laws feel that they are above the law. The other thing is that a parliamentarian is there because he asked his constituency to be allowed to be there, and in asking, represented to his constituency that he can do the job, that he's qualified, he's capable, he has the wherewithal and the time, and he can sit down and get that job done.
And he wants to do it.
He wasn't, the parliamentarian is not asked to go there.
Yes.
No one petitions him and says, please, Mr. Parliamentarian, go into Parliament. He campaigns to the public and asks to be allowed to represent the public. Therefore, to me, he should be considering what he can do in Parliament, not what he can get from Parliament. And as a general tone, for me, I think that the parliamentarians generally have it wrong that way. They enjoy their duty-free concessions, they enjoy their preferences and their VIP treatment here and there, and they see themselves as above the law, and that is entirely wrong.
The two, and you use the word conflated, the two are not necessarily conflated, but let's talk about the performance of parliamentarians and the Parliament. We've just finished what we are into the 13th month of the new administration. What's your assessment of Parliament and parliamentarians
Chris,
in this Parliament?
Chris, I've said it so often, I say it until I'm blue in the face. I've heard a lot of people criticizing this Parliament and saying we need a vibrant opposition and that kind of thing. Let me say first of all, the opposition is in such tatters and has lost so much respect that no one can quarrel when even the supporters of the large opposition say, "Oh, you're weak and you're in disarray." No one can quarrel with that. But that doesn't have anything to do with the impact that the opposition has in Parliament. For as long as Guyana has been independent, with a very small exception when AFC carried a swing vote, Parliament has been a fifth wheel to the coach, a totally useless appendage, because Parliament, once it is controlled by the majority government, does what the majority government wants to do. So if the majority government wants to pass a budget, it will use its majority in Parliament to approve the budget. If it wants to change a law, it will use its majority to change the law. We have had 50 years of the centralization of power, the grabbing on to power and holding, wielding, narrowing power to a small elite clique in the government, whether it's PPP or PNC or APNU or PPPC, doesn't matter. Each of them in turn has done it, using their majority in Parliament so that they control the money, they control the power, they control the ministries, they control the so-called autonomous bodies. And the reason you can do that is because you have a majority. This talk about a vibrant opposition is hot air, as long as government has the majority in Parliament.
But I know you're quite a serious person, Tim, but is not a bit cynical? It's factual, but is it cynical, given that you yourself, very successful legal career, not having taken any public interest, any interest in public matters to a great extent, decided to look, I am going there. I want to bring about change. Has that change come about, and are we anywhere on that trajectory for change?
No, the last time we had the potential for change is when the AFC had the swing vote in Parliament. They ruined that opportunity due to the personal incompetence of many of them sitting there, and also I think the lack of vision. They didn't understand why they were there, and they didn't understand the constituency that they represented. So that having failed, we went back to what was a two-horse race. And in a two-horse race, only one horse can win, and that one horse wins and controls Parliament. So we were back to where we were before, that the government controlled Parliament.
The standing orders of the National Assembly do permit private members' bills, that is other than government. Why is that? You seem to be discounting that. Do you have faith in that provision?
Well, again, we can fancy it up, but this is numbers. And if there are 33 of us and 32 of you, you can bring your private bill, but you only get 32 votes to support it. You could bring 20 private bills. You'll only get 32 votes to support it. And any bill I bring, I win. So we can fancy it up and we can create systems and parliamentary committees and law reform commissions. We can do all of these things. But if I got 33 votes, I win.
Yeah, that's the numbers, and that's perfectly correct. But what about this representation and bringing matters to the fore? I know Parliament is one place to do it, but it is a very important place. If we accept that election should mean something, if we accept that the Constitution should mean something, this is the only lawmaking body.
Well, none of this that we've described is unconstitutional. All of this is perfectly legal and perfectly in accordance with the laws. But if I have 33, I win. And that is what the Constitution says, and that is what the laws say.
Okay, I asked you about Parliament. And I don't necessarily mean to be personal about you, the representative. Do you feel the joiner has been effective? And if so, how?
You mean in Parliament?
Yes.
Chris, The effect of the joinder is that the opposition have 32 seats in parliament. They lose. This country will lose. Guyana will lose as long as the government controls parliament. This isn't a difficult concept, and there's no way to talk around it. If AFC back in the day had 8 seats and PNC had the remaining seats to 32,
25, yeah.
they lose. So the joinder could be 1 seat, it could be 10 seats. If it is part of an opposition with 32 seats, it loses. Guyana's hope rests on the government being a minority in parliament, so that those same private bills that you talk about can be brought to decentralize that power that we're so afraid of, that has been so abused by successive governments. And once that is done, once we can start relying on systems and a decentralization of that power controlled by a majority opposition in parliament, then we have light at the end of the tunnel.
One of the lawmaking is a critical function of the National Assembly, but some of the things that happen there help to bring some level of transparency. Let me raise an issue. We have the Vice President, Mr. Barjagdeo, making an announcement that, look, we will pay $1.75 billion out of public funds to a group of persons who had received all the lawful entitlements on the Determination of Employment and Severance Pay Act from their employer, Gaisuko. Isn't that the type of thing, the gas to shore, the mile project, are those things the place where the public and the exchange, because electors speak through their representatives on our constitution, and if you just ignore that, okay, the government could say we're not having parliament, but then you don't have accountability, you don't have this whole business of how money is spent.
You've raised a good example, and I think maybe we can show the danger in this system by giving specific examples. The government has 4 or 5 times in the last 2 years, since they've come into power less than 2 years ago, made a decision to give cash handouts to people. Now, in accounting terms and accountability terms, for me, this is a nightmare.
Nightmare is the word, yes.
You take money out of the bank, and when I think of $1 billion, if you put $1 billion in $1,000 bills on this table, it won't fit.
Yes.
Huge amounts of money. You hire people to put those banknotes into envelopes and give to other people that you fired to take them around the country and to put them into the hands of the individuals you say may or may not be entitled. I don't know, with the best intentions, how you could make that system foolproof. That system is subject to so much anarchy. I have heard horror stories about the system, about someone signing to get one sum of money, but in fact getting a smaller sum of money, about money not accounted for. And that's just at the bottom level. What about at the level of paying the individuals to go around, about the advertising, paying for the advertising, to say because we care, we're giving you this money, paying for those ancillary issues, the transportation, paying for the security to cart these large amounts of money around the place. So you ask the question, how can this be accounted for? How can this system be done that you take money out of the bank account, put it into envelopes and start handing it around to hundreds of people with real accountability? It's impossible. But how was this approved? You can't take money out of the consolidated fund. You can't take public funds and just spend it because you say so. You need parliamentary approval.
Well, it's happening.
But there has been parliamentary approval.
Well, not yet. On
Because
this
not on
particular-
this one, but on
No.
previous ones.
Yeah.
Because the government has been able to go into Parliament and say we need an emergency budget to do this thing that we're doing. Don't mind that we're going to call it because we care, and we'll be pictures and advertising for the government that is involved in it, even though it's public funds and not their funds. They go into Parliament and only 32 people can say no. They have won before it goes into Parliament. That is the danger of Parliament, and it's happened once, it's happened twice, it's now happening the fifth time. You will remember the last time they were giving to agricultural workers, and they had a big kerfuffle in Murby's about favoritism, some people getting lots of money, other people getting none, and a serious talk by the responsible minister saying, we will investigate and look into it.
And that's it.
And that's it. But after that, you still can go back to Parliament and get another budget with your 33 to say, no, we're going to give the ex-Gaisuco workers.
Even distorting and abusing the contingency fund arrangement, because you can only spend money as is approved by Parliament, or if it's urgent, unavoidable, and there's some other word,
And it's approved by Parliament.
and
Because
under the contingency fund.
Because you know it will be approved by Parliament, because you have 33.
No, but it should not be spent unless it meets those conditions.
But it does, because you will get parliamentary approval. So everything has been done according to the Constitution, as you say, because Parliament has approved the expenditure as is required by the Constitution. A bigger question you have to ask is, at what point does the favoritism and the politicizing of this thing become so bad that either one side shamefacedly tries to include the other side, or one side quarrels enough to make it stop? How can you justify having dismissed Gaisuco workers, having paid them their severance, that these are the workers that you are going to be handing $250,000 to? What about the rest of the unemployed in Guyana? What about the people in the urban areas who are more vulnerable because they can't go and throw a cast net and plant something in the backyard? The people who are more vulnerable to poverty, what about them? Now, the thing with Guyana is that we criticize, and there's so much to criticize, but I think that we need to take the conversation as well to solutions. And here's the thing in Guyana. Oil wealth is coming in. The government's borrowing power, they've increased their ceiling so they can borrow more. I suspect a lot of this money is coming from borrowing in anticipation of oil funds.
Yes.
That in itself is a danger, because what it means is the government plans to pass legislation using their parliamentary majority to give themselves free access to that oil money, but that's a discussion for the future. But the solution that Guyana needs is to understand that the wealth disparity that exists can be immediately cushioned because the government has access to increased funds, but it needs to be done by a welfare system where if you are unemployed, if your salary is low, if you're underemployed, if you got school-aged children, you know that systemically, as a matter of the rules, you are entitled to go to NIS and say, here I have 2 school-aged children, and you're entitled to a certain amount of money every term for them once you prove they're in school. If you're over a certain age, the welfare system automatically entitles you. If you show you're unemployed, you get a certain amount of money every month. If we had a standard, transparent, and regulated welfare system, then everybody, regardless of background, regardless of anything, knows what the rules are and knows how they are entitled. And this whole talk about favoritism and this whole catastrophic handing out money in envelopes becomes unnecessary. And it should be unnecessary, because there are now enough funds at the top to create that welfare system, to inject funds into the NIS so that the NIS can start doing what it should be doing, which is to care for the sick, care for the invalids, care for the elderly, and now start school programs so that parents with child-aged children can receive. And the unemployed, of course.
Do you think this business of $250,000 per person who left the industry do you think this can have the unintended consequence of persons saying, well, look, I've got $225,000. We have been told it's tax free, obviously. That's only going to happen. It's going to be tax free, and people are going to. There's no incentive anymore to go back to the industry, even if estates are reopened. Can this be one of the consequences?
Chris, no one seems willing to say this, but I'm going to say it. The Guyana sugar estates will never operate profitably as a commercially viable entity as long as it is controlled by the government. So I know that the government came into power with promises of reopening the estates. Let's look at history. These estates didn't develop under government control. They didn't become profitable and viable and the main backbone of the Guyana economy under government control. They did so privately. Private investors, private planters, private entrepreneurs developed the land, developed the drainage, developed the canals, developed the market, developed the transportation, and made it work profitably. Then it was nationalized. And the nationalization, let me hasten to say, done under the Burnham regime, but with the agreement of the opposition at the time, because we had to get these terrible capitalists out. And from the time it was nationalized, two things immediately happened. First, the government inserted into the hierarchy of management their friends. So you had a system, not of merit, but of getting a nice, high-paying, cushy job in this industry that was at the time making money because you're a friend loyal to the government. And the next thing that happened because of that is the competence went out the window and the decline started. And our sugar has declined on a straight line from 1970, let us say, going down past the Lome arrangement, past the fall of the price, past all the preferential European treatment that we used to get, the prices continuously slid down until under the Hoyt regime, you may remember, some foreign managers were brought in and it went through a little hiatus, a little renaissance before the government took over and it continued its slide. Now, if you can't even keep the thing going on an even keel, if you take something that is viable and run it into the ground, how on earth can you promise the population that now it's down in the earth so that the previous government has closed it down and fired everybody, you could get a thing up and running? Well, let me say, and let me stake my own attempt at some kind of analysis on it, that there is no way under government control Gaisuco will become a viable entity and state funds will continue to pour into Gaisuco and Gaisuco will continue to hemorrhage money, and the solution can only be privatization, and it cannot be privatization by some secret process. It has got to be by a system, open, transparent, where the highest bidder comes in with terms that he guarantees he will employ numbers of people for a period of time, what work he will do, and allow the private investor to invest.
Do you think this decision by the government, it was announced by the Vice President, but one presumes it's a government decision, takes the government, the PPPC, off the hook? It's committed to reopening these estates. Now it says, look, workers, we're not going to do it anymore. Take this money and go and be quiet.
When you say take them off the hook,
well, nobody's going to judge them for not keeping that campaign. Certainly the sugar workers are not going to blame them for failure to keep the campaign promise.
In politics, as far as a politician is concerned, the only hook is losing votes. That's the only hook. Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
So, in Justin Trudeau in Canada started to lose votes, he was on a hook. Our boy Boris Johnson with COVID started to lose votes. He was on a hook in England. We saw Donald Trump with his ridiculous foreign policy, losing votes and losing support. He's on a hook. There's no hook in Guyana. In Guyana, no matter how badly Gaisuco is managed, no matter how the economy twists and turns, the PPP supporters who are loyal stay loyal. No matter how APNU mismanaged and showed incompetence and showed heavy-handedness, the people who are APNU supporters remain loyal. There is no hook.
No, let me explain. In terms of the hook, had they not paid this money and not reopened their states, the workers would have said, "You've betrayed our trust."
And
so this here is
so the workers
compensating.
The workers say you betray our trust, and elections come around, and what do those workers do?
No, but no, all I'm saying, I know, and I've got a question I'm going to ask you then, because I'm sensing something about you. But that's the point I'm making, that if the government did not do this and did not reopen their states, they could have been held to have broken one of the major campaign promises, and possibly with some consequences. At the moment, they have broken the campaign promise, but they have said, "Look, I am going to pay you, so you're going to be all right, and I'm going to retrain you."
If the government had not opened Gaisuko, there would have been no consequences. The vote would not have changed, except possibly marginally, because the loyalists will vote loyally. If you are trying to suggest that the government is smearing what is this clear line, that they made a promise, and we all know they made the promise, we're opening these estates, and they are realizing they can't do it. So they're trying to segue into a softer way to let their people down. That's politics. But I think that will not change the end result of a vote. And this is why I have to go back to ask you, what hook are we talking about?
We noted a couple of weeks ago the killing of the businessman,
Mr. Boston,
allegedly in his home, seemed to have provoked Anand. It came out with a pretty strong statement. That suddenly that matter is not even in the news again.
Well, it will be in the news again, because if we don't hear something from the government, we will take another step about that.
It is not a step you would want to share at this stage.
No, we have to wait and see. You see, I did hear from a member of the government who indicated that they plan to do something. So I haven't heard anything further, but I am holding just to wait to see. But there's something I want to raise about that, because it's interesting. If you kill somebody, you're going to cover it up. So you're not going to admit publicly, "I was wrong, they were lying in bed and I shot them." You will try your best to cover it up. And for that reason, the system of laws that we have includes a Coroner's Act, which says that where someone dies violently, the resident district magistrate, the magistrate in the area, should be informed and should conduct an inquiry or an inquest as to the circumstances of the death, to see if the death was unlawful or if the death was accidental. That's important, because the person who caused the death is not going to voluntarily come and say, "I murdered somebody." There needs to be an independent inquiry as to what took place, so that the public, by that transparent, open process, is satisfied that this was an accident, or that the inquest has revealed that somebody acted wrongly and there will be charges and there will be a penalty. No, the public was up in arms because this man shot in his bed, in his bedroom. We don't know, I don't know if he was in his bed, but in circumstances it looked terrible. There needs to be a coroner's inquest. But to my surprise, the public was less vocal when two youngsters were shot on the UG Access Road. In that situation, the two youngsters were shot in what was first called a police stakeout and then was called a police shootout. And it was said they were the prime suspects in the murder of the electrician from Rumville. And to my surprise and disappointment, the comments that I saw on social media were good. We need to clear the society of these people. We need to get rid of the criminals. Give awards to these police.
Does that ring a bell? That kind of statement?
I'm afraid it does. But for me, when the police, as we have seen so many times, say that there was a shootout and these people were killed and we got 1 firearm and 6 rounds of ammunition, there needs to be a coroner's inquest so that publicly and transparently an investigation can be done by asking questions by an independent and qualified magistrate to find out how this happened. Because, Chris, let me tell you, if they got 1 gun between you and me and the police are there and you are holding the gun, I'm really hoping I don't get shot.
Yes.
Because both of us can't be holding the gun. There needs to be questions asked, and the only legal way to do this, and the mandatory way that is required by law to do this, is a coroner's inquest.
Yet we hear this is a matter that has been referred to the Police Complaints Authority. Is that the correct body?
The Police Complaints Authority is a qualified body to do something else. That is a body that must inquire into police procedures to ensure procedures were followed, to ensure that police have acted within the limits of their authority, have shown respect to the society, that kind of thing. And it's a very important function. And indeed, in a situation like this where there has been a confrontation, it's important for the Police Complaints Authority, if a complaint is made, to ask what happened. That has nothing to do with when there's a death. The two may overlap. There may be a death and the Complaints Authority sees that they followed procedure. But the magistrate must inquire as to how that death took place. Now, when we talk about the Complaints Authority, there are some questions I want to ask about procedure. I saw back and forth between Clement Rohi and Assistant Commissioner Conway, who I've never met, but from his writings I have regard for, about standard operating procedure. I would like to know, if you are going into someone's house without a warrant, when is that justified? Is there a minimum level of officer who can authorize it? Do you have to call someone from the DPP's office first? Because ordinarily you should not go into premises unless you have a warrant issued by a magistrate. I don't know when last I've heard about a warrant being issued by a magistrate. But it is the magistrate who is the authority that has the discretion to look at the facts and say, yes, boy, something's wrong here. I'm giving you a warrant to go and search Mr. Ram's house. But if the police come to search your house without the warrant, what are the standard operating procedures to allow that? When 11 armed men from a SWAT team knock down your door and come in, what's the standard operating procedure? I would like to know that. That is what the Police Complaints Authority needs to be talking about.
And what makes this all more egregious is that these persons apparently were attached to Georgetown.
That bothered me, because if you're in Georgetown and you got to drive up to Essequibo, and in a night you are going to several locations, you are clearly, I say clearly, but we don't know, we're speculating,
yes,
but you are apparently on a route that is preordained, that somebody has directed you, somebody's received information and somebody said, I want you to go and check these areas. Now, if you had the luxury of time to do all of that, you definitely had the luxury of time to find a magistrate and get a warrant.
How many magistrates you passed along the way?
So if you did not get a magistrate's warrant, I really would like to know how you can justify as a standard operating procedure going into a house, and that is something the Police Complaints Authority might be able to talk about.
You indicated that you some kind of private assurance that something is going to be done. How long does this society wait? A society that is as divided as we've been, a life has been lost. How long do we wait to get some kind of accountability on a matter like this? How long are you planning to wait?
55 years so far, Chris.
How long are you planning to wait?
We've been independent for 55 years. I'm a man of the pen. I talk, but that's all we can do. We talk, we push, we pressure. If we need to and if we have to, we go to court. But the thing with our democracy, and this is what I smile at. There are people watching your show, sitting comfortably at home, who are saying, these people are not doing anything about it, all talk. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Someone from Starbuck News said that recently, and I told him I would plagiarize it, and I've been saying it everywhere. It's not a spectator sport. If you think you can sit down comfortably and complain about something and a change will happen, then you're an idiot. Unless you decide you are going to be part of a change, unless you confront your demons, identify in yourself where the failings are, and see in the country where those failings are reflected and try to do something about it, then you're wasting time. And for 55 years since independence, we have seen that decline because we are so comfortable.
Well,
not doing anything about it.
I don't know if it's fair to fair to the to civil society. Not everybody's going to get actively involved in resistance, but persons are going to write, like yourself. Well, you're also in politics, but people will write, people will talk, and they will advocate. And
what does advocate mean?
I
to me, advocate means talk. That's why I asked you, because you said talk and advocate.
Meaning to promote changes in your society. And as you said, Tim, and the way you've said it makes one lose faith. And I think you're right. I never wanted to confront that demon. That Parliament maybe is a useless thing. If all we're doing in Parliament is this numbers game and 33, and you can do what you want, then what do you expect people to do? It's not a spectator sport, but not everybody's going to go there. Not everybody's equipped to go there.
Very few people are going to go there, and not everybody is equipped. You're right. But the starting point is yourself. You see, we just talked about Parliament and Parliament being useless, and we talked about the two horses in the race. If we can recognize that and confront that in ourselves, that my loyalty to one of the two parties means that it's a two-party race, and therefore the party in government continues what has been happening since independence, then common sense must tell you that Guyana's only hope is a third party. And therefore your inner demon must be to confront that the two parties are inherently a problem, and to say, I will no longer support either party because Guyana's only hope is a third party.
What makes it difficult, and I know we're going off a little bit, but what makes it difficult is when you have a situation, any government, but this government, what its recent actions suggest, it's very culpable of it. When a government gets in on that single majority, and then pushes the envelope, whether it's procurement, whether it's awarding contracts, whether it's chummy politics, whether it's handouts, whether it's ignoring the Constitution, that is going to make democracy difficult, and possibly, and even probably, make people think, well, this thing called democracy may not work for our society. That's the danger, isn't it?
Well, when you have a government-controlled parliament, it may have been democratically elected, but you, in a sense, have a dictatorship, because there is no checks and balances. You have the dictatorship of the elected government, and that's what we've always had. So the starting point always has to be, Parliament is a useless appendage if it's controlled by the government. And I don't think you twist it or turn it. I don't think you can get away from that. And you say Parliament is useless. We pay 65 people to sit down in there and shoot hot air. If we had boiled it down to 3, we'd be getting rid of 62 of them, and we'd have the same result.
Yes.
My 2 against your 1, and I win. And it's the same end result. You know, the Charandas fiasco, when Charandas broke ranks, and justifiably in my view, crossed the floor and voted in the no confidence motion for the opposition PPP at the time. That was seen as a huge betrayal, and in fact, the AFC and APNU treated it as an act of moral reprehensibility. I couldn't believe that.
Moral and worse, perhaps.
And in fact, it raises a danger, and this is where we have to separate the interest of Guyana from the self-interest of the 2 large parties, because it has created a precedent, and each side now looks very carefully at the members of parliament that it puts into parliament. This can happen again. I am willing to wager that when this highly touted constitutional reform begins to happen in 20 years after much delay and
20 years from when?
From now, I don't think anyone's going to hurry for constitutional reform. One of the things you will see is a consolidation and centralization of power by finding a way to stop a parliamentarian from crossing the floor. So there will be something put into that constitution to say you gotta give prior notice to the leader of the list or something to prevent that happening, because it is in the interest of the party to ensure that those parliamentarians that got in parliament are loyal. Because the one danger that exists in parliament is if you lose your majority because one of your people betrayed you.
You were right to come out there. Arnold was right to come out on the Orange Boston issue, and we haven't heard Arnold speak much. I haven't. You may have, and please correct me, and I accept I'm wrong. The gas to shore and the Mila project. These are extravagant projects. They could be spectacular failures. They can be transformational success as well. What is Arnold's position on these mega projects?
This goes back to parliamentary control. You will remember that under the PPP regime pre-2015, an Amalia Falls project was started, funded by public funds, approved by Parliament under the PPP democratically elected dictatorship. As soon as the AFC got the swing vote, Parliament threw that out, stopped the funds, and they
withdrew, in fact, because the opposition did not support it.
The writing was on the wall, because the opposition had control of Parliament.
Right.
That is the key. Opposition controlled Parliament. So funds were going to dry up. It's back on the cards now. Why is it back on the cards now? Because PPP controls Parliament. So this is where I'm leading to answer your question. If any project is going to work, the project must be done with the agreement of both large parties, transparently, because there has got to be continuity, there's got to be reliability, there's got to be certainty. And if in 4 years there's a danger the government changes and Amalia Falls goes again, and the gas to shore goes again, because a new government that didn't support it and didn't like it, because its friends didn't get the contracts, throws it all out, the entire economy suffers, the entire country suffers. So my answer to you is decentralization of power. As long as the PPP make this decision among the 2 or 3 favored and decide who's going to get the contract and decide how much money is going to be spent, and then wants to sell it to the country to say this is a wonderful deal, this will make electricity cheap, we know it won't. This will make cooking gas cheap, we know it won't. It cannot work. It will be another government-funded project, another Gaisuko deteriorating gradually.
On a much bigger scale.
On a much bigger scale. Another fiasco, and something that is liable to be cut short immediately if somebody else takes control of Parliament.
But
it needs both sides.
My question was Arnold's position and apparent silence on these matters.
Well, we've spoken on it on some programs. I've raised a point on GlobeSpan. You see, the public hasn't been given enough information, and we can talk about the gas to shore. The gas to shore is touted as being used for electrical generation. Now let's talk about electricity generation. Let's talk about electricity in Guyana. Guyana is such a large geographic area. It is something 1,000 square miles, that you cannot have a single source of generation and distribute from that single generator to the whole country. We got generation capacity over the river. We got in Region 3, we got in Borbisi. Kokwani got a separate one, Lethem.
Yes.
Now, if you're bringing gas to one point over the river there,
Wrong, yes.
you're not supplying the country.
Yes.
You haven't yet discussed how that gas is going to be trucked or piped or carried to other generators. You haven't discussed how you are going to convert the generation equipment you now have to accommodate gas. You haven't discussed if you are paying Exxon for this gas that they're unlawfully flaring, or if Exxon is paying you to take the gas. If Exxon doesn't have any use for the gas and is flaring the gas and needs to get rid of it, you know, I rather suspect we paying Exxon for that gas, so they should be paying us to take it off their hands. You haven't discussed the insurance aspects, the safety measures. You know, when these questions are raised, I hear an answer that there hasn't been a feasibility study. No, I hope that's not true. But I haven't seen one, and I haven't seen numbers, and I haven't seen projections. But I do know that the amount of money we're talking about as an initial expenditure is going to make some people very rich.
And probably make Guyana very poor. The local government elections, they're due this year. It seems to be off the cards, off the table. That would be a violation of the law again.
Well, in that regard, I find it hard to criticize, and I'll tell you why. It's run by GCOM. And we know that GCOM had been compromised. And we know that GCOM is undergoing administrative changes right now. Some top people have been removed from office. They need to put other people in office. I don't know how those 6 commissioners are going to agree on that whole process. So far, we have not seen very much in the way of discussion and accommodation by either side. So it's well and good to say the law says this must be done. We have to go beyond that to understand how it can be done. And I, for one, hesitate to criticize and just stay on the outside saying the law says you got to do it, and I can't conceive how you're going to get it
But
done.
surely, in my view, and I defer to your legal, I don't like the word superiority, but vastly greater
Not
experience.
but anyway, yeah.
Surely they ought to go to Parliament and make a legislative, at least tidy it up. We can't have a lawless situation. We have enough lawlessness when it comes to elections. When it comes to election spending, and you know my story in that one. That's what the rule of law says.
And you know, I agree with you, and yet this is where it gets laughable. You and I can sit here and discuss that, and tomorrow the little echelon within the government can say, you know, those 2 boys are right, and they go to Parliament with their 33 and they do it. It's not hard. So I think that we gotta pick our battles in our discussions, because if we get too technical and too punctilious in crossing T's and dotting I's, we lose sight of the larger problem. And the larger problem is government-controlled parliament equals dictatorship.
Well, that is so, but we can't. And as I said, I'm going to raise that in my final question. But take procurement commission and all this public spending. We don't have a procurement commission. This sure is unlawful. And now you talk about not a spectator sport. Maybe this is the kind of thing the Bar Association. We've both been in the Bar Association. We are both in the Bar Association. Isn't that lawlessness and dangerous lawlessness? Because you're spending billions of dollars without any statute, not only without any statutory authority, but in violation of the constitutional arrangements?
Well, let us see what favorites get picked this time. Because who appoints them?
All right, let me go to my final question, or final point, because we probably have 2 minutes. Politics can make one very cynical. You have boiled, and I can be wrong, but you seem to boil everything down, as you said. The critical issue is Parliament. But surely there has to be other things. There is accountability, there's a rule of law, there's good governance, there's conduct, the morality, integrity, and all of those things. Surely we cannot just dismiss, oh, well, once you've got this 33, 32, or 33, 34, 31, we can't do anything. Would not lead eventually to further problems in our country? And I use the word, it sounds to me, Tim, respectfully, it sounds almost that you're becoming cynical with the experiences you've had in politics in Ghana.
Okay, let me answer that as fully as I can. The leaders that we now have, Irfan Ali, Barra Jagbio, going down the line, are patriots that love Guyana. The leaders that we had, David Granger, Moses Nagamutu, going down the line, are patriots who love Guyana. Our problem...
Love Guyana or love power? Love...
No, the two are mutually exclusive discussions. You can love Guyana and love power. None of them hates Guyana.
All right, don't let me interrupt you, because you got just about 45 seconds.
None of them hates Guyana. But you have to distinguish the system and making sure the system is transparent and the system works so that there's accountability in the system. If you don't do that, the individuals who have power have scope for corruption. And with us, the system is compromised as long as the government controls the parliament, because the government is going to pass a law that says the money that we get in from gas and oil, the government can have. The minister can decide what to do with it.
My response to that is this. Yes, the government can do it, but surely our whole constitution is based on the rule of law that we can take matters to court. There is no reason, in my view, Tim, why this situation of the Procurement Commission, but let's set aside for the moment the Chancellor and the Chief Justice being acting upon this, several bodies. We just don't have these things, and we can't, in my view, just say, well, it's because of parliamentary majority. Then we're on a very slippery slope.
Well, you're trying to discuss a very wide range of subjects, but at the end of the day, I think that is what it comes down to.
All right.
Because your commission, your procurement commission, the government can lawfully pass legislation to decide how to appoint them, and go ahead doing what it's doing. As long as they have 33, they can do that.
But in the meanwhile, we can. There's a court. The court is one of the roots. It's one of the pillars of a democracy. Anyway, interesting discussion.
It's been a pleasure, Chris.
It's always a pleasure. So, Mr. Jonas, thank you again. I know your Wednesday night is your Globe Span night, but thank you so very much for coming right now.
To be here.
And any policy pronouncements by you or any other leaders of ANOG, always Plain Talk is a forum that's available and open.
I hope to be back soon.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Operators and viewers, thank you, good night, and I'll see you next week.
Rightful room belong to us. My father don't tell I and I, everything shall fall to I and I is a must. So Babylon set the living.